Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar discussing Wildfire and Hurricane Indemnity Program Plus, also known as WIP Plus. My name is Natalie Collins, and I am the Director of Member Relations here at the California Association of Winegrape Growers. Last week, the U.S. Department of Agriculture announced that growers who suffered crop losses due to natural disasters in 2018 and 2019 are eligible to apply for assistance through WIP Plus. Today's webinar will discuss the program at length and include information on qualified losses, payment limitations, and the application process. Presenting today will be California Farm Service Agency Farm Program Chief, Navdeep Dhillon, and Sandra Becker, Farm Service Agency Ag Program Specialist. Both Navdeep and Sandra have been excellent resources navigating through WIP Plus, and I'd like to thank both of them for their support and their willingness to present on this webinar today. Also on the call, we have John Aguirre, the President of the California Association of Winegrape Growers, and someone who has worked diligently along with our federal lobbying team, Congressman Mike Thompson, and grower groups from Mendocino and Lake County to ensure that wine grapes were covered under the WIP Plus program. Now, real quick, I want to go over the format of the presentation. We'll begin with a 45-minute presentation and then open it up for Q&A. During the presentation, we will not be stopping to take any questions, but I encourage you to type your questions in the questions tab on your dashboard or raise your hand and we will get to your questions at the end of the webinar. A recording of this webinar will be available upon the conclusion of the presentation. I will also send everybody a Q&A sheet of any questions asked on the call today. So now, without further delay, I will turn this presentation over to Navdeep and Sandra.
So the disaster event does not need to occur on all of your acres for all of your acres to be eligible. In order to be an eligible crop, the crop must either be eligible for federal crop insurance or be eligible for the non-insured crop disaster assistance program, which is also known as NAP, which is a program that our agency administers as well. And because grapes are both eligible for federal crop insurance, and in those counties where we don't offer federal crop insurance, they are covered, eligible to be covered under NAP, so that this is an eligible crop for this program. The program does not cover grazing or volunteer crops. WIP Plus does not have any AGI restrictions, AGI meaning adjusted gross income, so there's no limits on AGI for WIP Plus. The payment limitation that you can receive from this program per year is going to be $125,000 is the standard payment limitation. However, if you certify that 75% of your adjusted gross income is from farming, ranching, or forestry, then you can have that payment limitation increased to $250,000 per year. Now, that does require a CPA or an attorney to also sign off on that, and we have a form for that, which is completely optional. If you don't want to do that, then you will just be held to the $125,000 payment limitation per year. So this program, as I mentioned earlier, covers calendar years 2018 and 2019, but could potentially also affect a 2020 crop. So you have 3 years of payment years available, and this program will cap it at for all producers at $500,000 cumulative over those 3 years. So an eligible producer for WIP Plus is going to be a U.S. citizen or resident lawful alien and must have both share of the risk and share of the ownership of the crop. So for WIP Plus, we have 2 different types of losses. We have production losses to the crop, which will include quality losses, and then we also have losses to the actual vines themselves, either damaged or actually completely destroyed vine losses. So first we'll talk about crop loss. So the different payment factors that we're going to consider when processing a crop loss claim, some of the factors will be the yield, the price of the crop, the amount of production, whether or not there was any salvage value, whether or not the crop was harvested or unharvested. And then we will also consider the quality loss production to count and the WIP plus factor. So we're going to talk a little bit about these factors. So the yield part of the payment factor is your expected yield, what we expect you to produce in your vineyard. So if it's a NAP covered crop, then we're going to use the approved production history from the NAP program, which is that program that FSA also administers. If it's insured by federal crop insurance, then we are going to use the expected yield that is provided by the risk management agency. And if the crop is altogether uninsured, you just don't have any kind of insurance on it, then we will use the county expected yield that is established by our agency, FSA, for each county and grape variety. So the production, where we get your amount of production from, if you filed a claim under NAP, the Non-Insured Assistance Program, then we will use the production amount related to that claim. And also, if you were insured and you filed a claim under federal crop insurance, then we're going to use that production. If there was no claim previously filed, then we are going to ask you to provide verifiable or reliable production records. Verifiable production records are records that can be verified by a third party. Reliable records would be any contemporaneous records that you have, and then we would compare those to neighboring farms to see if they fell in line with other losses. So the quality loss is when the crop is able to be sold for the use intended, in this case, processed wine grapes. However, you receive a lesser rate due to reduced quality of the crop. And here we're largely talking about the smoke taint to the grapes. In order to qualify for a quality loss, you have to have a price reduction greater than 25% of the price. The grapes must have been adulterated prior to harvest, so they must have taken that smoke on while they were on the vine, and there must be acceptable evidence to the county committee that the price was reduced due to natural adulteration. So we can either take test results if you've tested for the smoke compounds, or we can also take, if you have a rejection letter or a settlement sheet letter from the buyer indicating that it was reduced due to smoke or rejected due to smoke or something like that. And that's not all inclusive. There could be other available documentation that can meet that requirement, but we do have to have something that connects the price reduction due to the natural adulteration. So quality losses, the way that we are going to treat the quality losses is that's going to be reflected in the production to count. So we actually reduce the amount of production that we credit you for in determining any potential benefits. So the prices that we are going to use are not contract prices. We are going to use the established prices that are established by the Risk Management Agency and FSA to determine. And then, so we'll compare the established prices that we have with the price that you actually received in order to determine if that 25% loss threshold was met. So here's kind of an example on how we would reduce the production due to a quality loss. So if our established price is $1,000 per ton and you harvest 100 tons and you're able to sell the production for only $600 per ton, then we are going to divide that $600 by the $1,000 to get 60%. So in this example, we can see that you've only received 60% of our established price. And so therefore, instead of using 100 tons as production to count, we are going to multiply that 100 tons by the 60% and only use 60 tons production to count. So as I mentioned, the price is going to be our established price, not the contract price. Another factor that goes into determining potential benefits is going to be salvage or secondary use. The salvage is when the product is sold to a market not established by FSA. And so for wine grapes, there is no other established market that we have at FSA. So for any other use would be salvage value. In salvage value, we would just deduct the amount of money you receive from your payment, and we would not count that production in figuring out your payment. We would treat it as if you had no production. Another factor that goes into determining the payment is the unharvested factor. So whenever there is a crop is unharvested, this factor is applied due to the grower not incurring the cost of harvest. And so it does reduce, it's a percentage factor that reduces the payment. Currently, we are reviewing the unharvested factors for grapes in California, and so that is yet to be determined. The other loss that I mentioned earlier is the vine loss. So that's going to be damage to the actual vine itself or complete destruction of the vine. So the damage is based on 2 growth stages for grapes specifically. So stage 1 are vines that are less than 3 years out, and that would incur a 65% damage factor and a value of $18. And stage 2 is 3 or more years out, and that is a 30% damage factor at a value of $23 per vine. And if it is dead or completely destroyed, they receive 100% of the stage price, so either $18 or $23. However, that's still subject to the WIP plus factor, which we'll talk about. And for this, unlike for some of you who might be familiar with the tree assistance program that we also administer, this losses to the actual vine under WIP plus do not have a minimum loss requirement. So here I'm going to talk about a few quality loss examples specifically related to smoke. So in our first example here, a winery rejects the grower's grapes due to smoke taint, and the grapes are unharvested. The grower has documentation from the winery stating the basis for the rejection. So this one's pretty easy. This is an eligible situation. We would count it as 0 production to count since all the grapes were rejected and determined unusable. However, an unharvested factor will apply because this crop was not harvested and did not incur the expense of harvest. In our second example, the grower sold his grapes at a substantial discount to a winery. The winery had concerns about the grapes, but was willing to honor the contract and accept the grapes, but at a steeply discounted rate. So here, this is also going to be an eligible condition, but we would need the documentation from the winery stating that the reduced price was due to the smoke taint. And then we would apply that production adjustment for the quality. And there would be no unharvested factor because this crop was harvested. Our third example here, the winery agreed to receive and process grapes into wine on the condition that if the wine was determined to have significant defects, then the grower would be required to take possession of the wine. And the grower sold the wine for an intended use of vinegar. This is also an eligible situation. We would count this as 0 production to count, and we would count the dollar amount received for the salvage value use of vinegar as salvage value. And that would be deducted from the payment. In our next example, the grower's grapes were rejected by the winery due to concerns over smoke taint. The winery's rejection is documented, so we have that required paperwork. The grower contracts with a different winery to make wine on their own account from the rejected grapes. So the potential outcomes in this scenario are, the first one, the grower is going to make bulk wine and sell it at a modest profit, no profit, or a modest loss. This would be an eligible condition to apply for the program. The price received for the wine would be converted to tons, and the production adjustment for quality would apply. The second potential outcome in this scenario is that the grower determines that the wine is unsellable and just dumps it. This is also going to be an eligible cause of loss. If they dispose of it and dump it, then we're just going to use zero production to count. If they are able to sell it as an intended use other than wine, we are going to have zero production to count, and the dollar value received would be salvage value deducted from any potential benefit. If it's sold as cheap wine, then the price received for the wine would be converted to tons, and there would be a production adjustment for quality. The third potential outcome in this scenario is that the grower remains in possession of the wine. They're unable to sell the wine, and then they just sit on it waiting for a buyer, or they give up and dispose of it. So if the ultimate outcome is that they just dispose of it, they dump it, then it's eligible, and we would count zero as production to count. So this is the actual payment calculation that we use to determine any potential benefits under the WIP Plus program. So we would take the expected value, which is going to be your expected yield times the price of the grapes times the amount of acres that you have. So we're going to look at your expected value, and we will multiply that by the WIP Plus factor, which is going to give us the WIP Plus value. The WIP Plus factor does reduce your expected value for this program. And I think I do have a slide on that I'll show you here. And then we'll take the WIP Plus value, and then we'll minus the actual value, what you actually received for the crop, if anything, minus any previous indemnity payments that you may have received from NAP or federal crop insurance. And then we will also subtract any secondary use or salvage value from that benefit. So here's that talked about WIP Plus factor. The WIP Plus factor is applied to both the crop and the vine loss calculations and is determined based on the level of coverage that you had prior to the disaster event. So it's going to be based, if you didn't have any insurance at all, the WIP Plus factor is 70%. So we're going to take your expected value, multiply that by 70%, and that would be your WIP Plus value. And then you can see there on the left side, it just depends on the level of coverage. The higher level of coverage that you had, if you had NAP or federal crop insurance, then the higher your WIP Plus factor. So this program could potentially cover up to 95%. So there is what we call a linkage requirement, and this is a requirement if you receive benefits under WIP Plus. It is a requirement that you will purchase insurance or NAP for the next 2 years. So the 2 years that you would need to purchase, that would be both 2022 and 23. And the coverage level that you must purchase is a minimum of 6,100. So it's 60% of your expected production, 100% of the price. The exception to this linkage requirement is that vine losses are not subject to it because we do not insure the vines. The requirements for these are some of the producer requirements for WIP Plus. We do require that you file a crop report with our agency reporting your amount of acres, plant dates, varieties, and other information. We do require that you provide production records. We also need a notice of loss and application for payment filed prior to the deadline. Any supporting documentation for your individual situation, whether that's the proof of rejection of the grapes or reduction in price due to smoke taint, and anything else that we might need to establish your farm records if you don't already have a farm-in tract set up with our office, then we need to establish those. And so any of those records would also be required. And that's just going back here, that's the way we do, there is an application available online. However, we strongly suggest that you make an appointment with your local county office, because there are so many other pieces to the puzzle that are not available online. Some are, some aren't, but to get the whole package and to make sure that it's complete and correct, we strongly advise you to go into your county office and work with them directly. Now I just want to go over really briefly the Tree Assistance Program, which is another program that is administered by our agency, the Farm Service Agency. I want to make sure that everybody is aware of the availability of TAP for grapes. So it is a completely separate program than WIP Plus, but you can actually participate in both WIP Plus and the TAP program. It is not duplicate benefits, because WIP Plus offers assistance due to the lost crop or vine, whereas TAP offers cost share assistance to replace and rehabilitate the vine. So they're different losses, and both programs are available to you, and you may collect payments under both programs. The payment limitation does not apply to the TAP program. WIP Plus, as we learned earlier, has a payment limitation. TAP does not. TAP is limited to 1,000 acres annually, and you do have an AGI requirement for TAP of not more than 900,000. The leased land, you can lease the land. You're not required to own the land, but you are still required to have the risk and control. And the deadline to apply for the TAP program is ongoing, but it's always 90 days from the date of the disaster. Eligible TAP producers have to suffer qualifying vine losses in excess of 15% mortality. So I mentioned earlier that vine losses under the WIP Plus program have no minimum loss requirement. However, the TAP program does require a minimum 15% mortality loss before it will kick in. And the producers have to have owned the eligible vines when the disaster occurred. And because this is a cost share program for a replacement or rehabilitation, then you need to replace or rehab the vines within 12 months from the date your application is approved in order to receive that cost share. The TAP program requirements, some of the requirements are to complete the 899, which is the application, timely, to submit any supporting documentation, file all necessary agency paperwork. You need to complete the practice, as I mentioned, within 12 months. We do have a final practice inspection that we send a representative out to make sure what was completed. And then we also need your invoices so that we can determine your actual expenses. And of course, we would need you to sign your final application for payment. The application for TAP is filed by the crop type and stand and producer share, and that would be filed in your administrative county that maintains your farm records. I mentioned earlier, you have 90 days, calendar days to file that application from the time of the disaster. The TAP program does not have any application fees associated with it. It is a cost share program. So that means we will reimburse part of your cost to rehab or replace the vines. If you are in a share situation where you have a percent share with somebody else, then everybody has to file a separate TAP application for their share. Payments under the TAP program, the amount that we're going to cost share for you, are going to be limited to the lesser of our established practice rates from FSA, or 65% of your actual cost of replanting the trees or in excess of 15% mortality. And we will reimburse a maximum of 50% of the cost of your land prep in excess of 15% mortality. So the established FSA practice rates are the maximum rates allowable under this program. And these current established practice rates for our agency is $4 for replacing a vine, $3 to rehab it, $2 the cost to plant, the labor cost, and $500 of site prep. So these practices are currently actively under review at the national office. They are set by our national office in DC, but they are currently in a project, they're under review, so that could be subject to change. So here's the website that you can locate your local Farm Service Agency county office that can help you for more information on WIP Plus or TAP and help you complete any applications and provide more information to you.
Okay, so that is the end of the presentation. At this time, we welcome any questions or maybe further clarification that you need on anything that was discussed today. As a reminder, you can type in your question in the question tab, or you can also raise your hand and we will call on you to ask a question by audio. Now, Sandra, just as clarification for the tree assistance program, somebody that has loss from pest and disease, does that qualify as well?
Yeah, we do have several different diseases that are eligible for the tree assistance program right now, including red blotch, that particularly with vines, and we have several other causes as well. They can contact their local county office for more information on that. And a disease, I will say, that is not currently approved, could still be eligible, but we do need somebody to file an application in order to get that looked into. So just because it's not currently approved doesn't mean that we wouldn't approve it.
Okay, perfect. Another kind of clarification question is if a grower receives payment for quality losses due to spoke tape under crop insurance, is the grower still eligible to apply for under the WIP Plus?
Yes, yeah, that's a good question. So if they already received a quality loss under crop insurance, their production should already be adjusted, and so we would not apply a further adjustment factor to their production, but we would certainly they're still eligible. They might have had a production loss. So.
Okay. And this is also just clarification. I know we talked about at the beginning, but talking about the application deadline for WIP Plus.
Right. So it is a little odd that we don't have one yet. But considering that this program is going to cover all eligible losses in the calendar years of 18 and 19, I would not anticipate that to obviously be prior to the end of the year. I mean, it's at least going to be that far, and I would anticipate hopefully a little bit more, but we just don't know right now. Yeah.
Kind of going back to TAP, someone was questioning from the 2018 Mendocino fires. They wouldn't be eligible to apply now because it missed the 90-day deadline.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We do, with TAP, we cannot just automatically approve a late filed application. However, I think that, you know, if a producer believes that their application has merit, that their situation has merit, and that they definitely suffered from a qualifying event, I would encourage them to apply anyway. There are some relief provisions, and I mean, it takes a little bit longer. There's a little bit more paperwork involved, but you can always submit an application. We'll never reject you to submit an application, and in some cases, we might even be able to get that late file approved. Okay, so.
Very good. Someone also asked, do they need to apply in the county office where the damage occurred, or can they apply at any FSA office?
You can apply at any FSA office, but your paperwork is just going to get forwarded to your administrative office. They would be the ones to process it. Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So is it recommended to go into
Yeah, it really is. They're going to know your situation a lot better locally.
This is John and Gary. I've got a question. I I don't think you mentioned this previously. If you did, I apologize. But how long do you expect it will take to process these claims and to ultimately cut a check?
For the WIP Plus?
Yes, WIP Plus.
For WIP Plus, it's hard to say, and it's dependent on workload, but we do have funding, so I don't know.
Well, from the time, sorry.
I defer.
This is Navdeep, Dhillon, I'm the Farm Program Chief for California. So from the time that you have a complete application, if everything is working, the agency has 30 days to pay. And so otherwise, anything after that, we owe you interest if everything is completed correctly. So we try really hard to pay you within the 30 days. However, when you contact your local FSA office, you make an appointment, you file your application, at that point, they should give you a better idea in terms of how long it's going to take them.
So a follow-up question then. There is some concern that overall, in the scope of all the disasters that have occurred in 2018, 2019, many growers throughout the country are going to be applying for WIP Plus assistance. And so the question is there the risk of funding falling short of the ultimate need, assistance being prorated, or is it a matter of first come, first serve?
Yeah, currently we do not anticipate any funding issues. It is not currently prorated or factored, other than the factors I spoke about. But that there's not a plan to reduce the payments any further.
Okay. But probably the sooner you make the claim and get into the queue, the better you are.
Yes. If the agency intends to factor the payments, that would be announced. Where we are not aware of anything like that at this point. As soon as the applications are processed, we're trying to get those paid.
Okay.
Do we have any more questions from anybody on the webinar today? I also wanted to remind you guys that a recording of this webinar will be available, and I can also get you a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. Okay, seeing no further questions, we will go ahead and end this webinar, but if you do have follow-up questions, feel free to contact us here at the CAWG office, or you can contact Sandra or Navdeep directly. So thank you everybody again for joining the call, and thank you Sandra and Navdeep for your presentation today.